Welcome to Hot Springs Village Inside Out, a weekly podcast where Hot Springs Village, Arkansas is the star. Join me, Randy Cantrell, and my co-host Dennis Simpson as we discuss the history, facts, people, places, events, lots more surrounding Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. Visit the website at hotspringsvillageinside.out.com. Today's show is brought to you by Central Arkansas's favorite radio station, KVRE. Find them on the dial at 92.9 FM. Stream them live at kvre.com. Our guest today is Siegfried Johnson. Sig is senior pastor of Christ of the Hills United Methodist Church in Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. Sig is also the author of Dancing with David, a work of historical religious fiction. We welcome Sig to the show.
Another episode of Hot Springs Village Inside Out, and today our special guest is Mr. Sig Johnson. Dr. Sig, I would say, but nobody ever refers to you that way. Sig, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Dennis. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And we are recording as we hit the record button today. It is March 1st, and we would consider this a semi-spring-like day. This is the day we have to remind us that last week weather was trying to kill us, right?
Beautiful day today in Hot Springs Village.
I'm telling you. So I can't wait to get into this. We're not going to talk about what you think we're going to talk about. We have a pastor on today, and it's not going to be what you think, but we're going to start about what you might think. Tell me about, you have a new book coming out very soon. Tell me about the format and the genre, because I think I'm a well-read guy, and I've never heard of this genre before. Tell me what this is.
Well, the genre is called religious historical fiction and Christian historical fiction as well. And really what it is, it's an archaeological mystery that's premised on actual Dead Sea discoveries from 1956 and from 2017 in two different caves at the Dead Sea. And then my imagination goes wild from there.
How do you sleep at night, man?
Benadryl.
And Big Sav. That's mine and Diane. That's it's a little Big Sav here and the Benadryl, and and I tell my doctor that, and he's like, Benadryl? Oh, that's so silly, but it works, right? So we'll come back to this in just a minute, because this is the crux of it. But Sig, how did what boy from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, make it to Hot Springs Village? It's been a long trip and a circuitous path, right?
Well, it has. And I was in ministry very early, at an early age, at the age of 20. And then I wanted to leave ministry after my seminary time in 1985. And I headed to Ann Arbor, Michigan to study with the great Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, David Noel Friedman.
Really?
And so I was with him there for 5 years from 1985 during the late 1980s. And it was really then that the seed for this book that occurred. So I was at Ann Arbor in the University of Michigan, and eventually I felt the call to come back into parish ministry and come back to Arkansas, which is my home. And the bishop of the United Methodist Church opened up an avenue for that in 1994. And the rest is history. I've served in the Arkansas Conference of the United Methodist Church now for 27 years.
Really? Now, somewhere in there's a Baptist in the woodpile somewhere. I heard there was a Baptist period in there somewhere.
There was indeed. I was playing basketball at Arkansas State University in the 70s and attending with some friends a Baptist church, and felt a call into ministry during that time. And so I spent the first 5 or 6 years as a Baptist pastor.
Well, okay. So we've done that, and you're skipping over, because I know you're a very humble, modest guy, but you were pastor at Pulaski Heights Methodist in Little Rock, where that was the big TV show that they were. No. That's don't give misinformation here. No, what'd I do?
There are two very large United Methodist churches in Little Rock. One of them is Pulaski Heights, and the other one is St. James, more in West Little Rock in Pleasant Valley. And I was senior pastor for 6 years at St. James United Methodist Church. Pulaski Heights was our rival, you said.
I'm sorry, they were the Hillcrest people.
Yeah, don't go there. They called us the Country Club Church too, since we were right there by Pleasant Valley Country.
Well, y'all were on the other side of 430. That's why they gave you all the ritzy end of things that way.
That's
well.
Correct.
No, the reason why I bring that up is because you've served in lots of capacities, and to be very frank, had a very full career. And you and I went to lunch not too long ago, and one of my questions was, did you ask to be moved to Hot Springs Village, or did that just occur, or how did that work?
I didn't ask to be moved to Hot Springs Village. In the United Methodist Church, we serve under an appointment system. But when Bishop Muller told me he was considering me for this appointment, I jumped all over it. He just talked about this congregation, and I've known, of course, this congregation, its reputation. And so I really wanted to come here, and have loved Hot Springs Village, living on the lakes and playing golf and slowing down a little bit from not much, but a little bit from the much larger church in Little Rock.
So I'm hearing it's a struggle. Is what I'm hearing.
Oh, such a struggle. When the bishop told me about this, he hugged me and he said, one great thing about Christ of the Hills is, in this mostly retirement community, you will have no more night meetings. All of your important meetings will happen at 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock. And you can go home at 5 o'clock and be with your family.
And here's the news, though. Number one, go home is just a couple of miles. And
That's
number
right.
two, the 10 o'clock meeting, that's code for you need to be there at 9:55. Because, you know, if you're on time in the village, you're 10 minutes late. You know, you got to be. Anyway, enough village talk. Let's talk more about the book. So this is not your first book. You've authored some other books before, but historical biblical fiction. I mean, I see kind of the genesis of that now, but how did you get there? Is this a genre that I mean, how many books are there that way?
Oh, there are thousands and thousands and thousands.
Really?
The book really started in so many ways when I was in the University of Michigan, and I remember being in a doctoral seminar there with, as I said, the great Dead Sea Scrolls scholar David Noel Friedman. And that's where I first learned about a psalm called Psalm 151.
Right.
And there are only 150 psalms in the Bible. But Psalm 151, a very brief autobiographical psalm of King David's been known since before Jesus. It was in the Septuagint, in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, that was translated in Alexandria, Egypt, before Jesus was born. And it included a non-biblical psalm at the end of the 150 psalms that's often called Psalm 151, where David describes two things: how he was a shepherd boy outside of Bethlehem, and he was called to be anointed by Samuel, even though he was smaller than his brothers.
Sure.
And less handsome, he said, than his brothers. And the other story he relates is his defeat of the giant Goliath.
Right.
And I wondered then, why would David offer an autobiographical psalm and not give us much more of his life? And scholars thought Psalm 51 was only a Greek edition that had no real Hebrew Bible undergirding to that.
So basically a post canonization or what, exactly. Post Jesus.
But that changed in 1956. In 1956, as the Dead Sea Scrolls were being discovered, there was a scroll out of Cave 11, Qumran Cave 11, called the Great Psalms Scroll, that actually included the Hebrew text of this psalm that had been known for 2,000 years.
Really? Well, hang on. And I apologize to our listeners, but I want to back up to the 10 Mile High View. What are the Dead Sea Scrolls? I mean, you and I have these conversations and I'm on the same page with you, but to the casual observer who may not know what the Dead Sea Scrolls are, what are they and why were they so pivotal, Sig?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the late 1940s and through the 1950s on the banks of the Dead Sea, in the caves around the Dead Sea, in what's known as the Qumran community. And the idea was that was a religious sect called the Essenes. And when the Romans came and just destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and conquered the entire region, that the Essenes hid their sacred documents. into the surrounding caves. The Dead Sea, of course, is the lowest surface point on the face of the earth. It's some 1,300 feet below sea level.
Wow.
And so they hid those scrolls in jars there. And a little Bedouin boy, actually in the late 1940s, was hunting for a lost sheep and threw a rock into one of the caves and heard a crackling, heard a breakage, and it was one of those jars that broke. And that started, they found the scrolls in there that were 2,000 years old, and that started the search for the Dead Sea. So in all those caves around the Dead Sea, the search went on. And in cave 56, in cave 11 in 1956, was discovered the undergirding Hebrew text of that psalm that had been known for 2,000 years, but it only told those two stories of David. So I always wondered, what if I could just imagine an archaeologist in the year 2021 who, in another Dead Sea Scroll cave, and this is going to happen in cave 53 in my book, which is a very real cave that was discovered in 1993 and excavated in 2017 by Liberty University here in the United States, right, and the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And what if a new archaeologist of my imagining would discover the entire Psalm 151 that carries the trajectory of David's life much, much further into his life, all the way to the point when he actually dances. The title of the book is Dancing with David. When he is dancing in leading the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem after he had conquered the city and made it his capital city. And so that's what I do. On 6 limestone tablets, I imagine the complete Psalm 151. And that starts the story.
Can I say that is absolutely fascinating. It really is. So I understand that you saw and pardon my loose term, but you saw decades ago, basically a dangling participle. And you said, I wonder what the rest of that paragraph would say.
That's a very good way to describe it. I wish I had thought of that.
Well, no, I think about that, and I think, it's one of those things where, its absence or its silence is greater than what it might be imagined. I want to go back to just a couple of things real quick, and I appreciate you giving us a recap. I find it fascinating. You said that, was it cave 53? You said?
Cave 53, that's correct. Discovered in 1993.
Discovered in 1993 and only excavated in 2017?
Well, they did some initial excavations.
Right.
But they, but the deepest excavation was in 2017 with those 2 great schools. And it was decided then, because they found no scrolls. No Hebrew text scroll has been found since 1956.
Really?
And so I'm imagining here in 2021, the very first Hebrew Dead Sea Scroll found. But what they did find, Dennis, in cave 53 are 7 jars that were just like the ones that were found in the actual Dead Sea Scroll caves. And so what the excavators, the chief excavators, concluded was this had actually been a Dead Sea Scroll cave, and it had been looted by locals, and the scrolls were actually taken to the markets there in Jerusalem, and to the antiquities markets, and considered to be other Dead Sea Scrolls found in other caves. But they're already out there. We just didn't know their original provenance.
Yeah. And for those who wonder, so it's a Dead Sea Scroll, and you find these pieces of parchment in a jar, in a pottery jar, in a cave in the middle of the desert, 2,000 years later or whatever. Why is that important? And if you don't get it, that is, the ancient Hebrew scriptures, we want to think that those had fidelity and they didn't change throughout the years. Well, there's nothing like a 2,000-year checkup to go, oops, look, here's a copy of some of the original Essene scripts, right?
Exactly right. That's one of the most interesting things about the discovery of the Dead Sea Scroll was it predated any existing Hebrew text of the Bible. And so the obvious question, as you've just stated it, was when we look at at the Dead Sea Scrolls produced 2,000 years ago and look at the most recent Hebrew text we have, how close is the actual Hebrew text to what we already know? And of course, the answer was very, very reliable. And now, not all the Dead Sea Scrolls are biblical texts. There are other community texts and laws and rules for the Qumran community and so forth. So it's not all the Copper Scroll and others, the Temple Scroll. So it's not all biblical, but where you have a biblical text, very important to compare it to the known biblical Hebrew text. And the result was very satisfying.
And I'm going to chase a rabbit just for me, just for a minute. Tell me more about the Essenes.
The Essenes were a monastic sort of a community that lived out in the desert. Many perhaps thinking that the actual bureaucracy, if you would say, of the temple in Jerusalem had become corrupt in the same way we might look at Washington, D.C. of being corrupt.
Well, this sounds
they
familiar.
Move out into the fringes.
I've heard this story. This sounds familiar. So they were the modern day military militia, or the back to the landers, because
this was flyover territory, no doubt.
They were what? I'm sorry.
Flyover territory.
Flyover territory.
So they were out in, and many people, by the way, people will know the Jesus story. Many think that John the Baptist was one of those Essenes.
Really?
Who, the Bible describes him as wearing camel hair and eating locust and honey. Yeah. That he was out there in that monastic community because Jesus would have been, he baptized Jesus, and that would have been very near Qumran, right where the Jordan River empties into the Dead Sea, only a few miles from Qumran. So did Jesus actually come out from Jerusalem to be baptized by his cousin, John the Baptist, who was an Essene? It's an interesting question.
It's a fascinating question. Well, let's go back to the book just for a minute. Dancing with David, the name of your book, which is a brand new book. When does this release?
Well, it was actually went live on Amazon on February the 15th. So people have been getting the Kindle and the paperback copy since then. The actual launch date of the book, though, is a very important day in the book and a very important day in the Jewish calendar, and that will be March the 17th. I'm looking forward to doing a program here at the church to talk about the archaeological and architectural underpinnings of this historical fiction, this religious historical fiction.
Well, Randy and I were discussing this, and unfortunately, Randy's had to step away for just a moment. But Randy and I were discussing this. I read quite a lot, but I can't remember the last time I read just a pure fiction book, and because I keep looking for truth in it, and I think this book will blow my mind because I'm wanting to delineate between, well, I know that's fact. Okay, well, where do we vary? How do we go? How do you play in that?
Oh, the great author makes it so confusing you won't really know, right?
Okay, you're trying to turn me off of reading it now.
No, this book takes you, it does make it very clear. And this book takes you into 3 time periods. It's really, the first part of the book is set in 1988 in Memphis in a Christian college. And so there's a lot of 1988 in here, very real 1988 things in sports, film, politics, and so forth. It's the lectures on Hebrew poetry, just like I was in the lectures on David Noel Friedman's Hebrew poetry at the University of Michigan. That's how this started. In a way, you could say this is a fictionalized autobiography for me, because so many of these things are very real. So not only 1988, but then you go back to the biblical accounts of King David in 1000 BC, so 3,000 years ago. So you have that time period, and you have a reflection back to King David. And then it all leads to the last half of the book, which is a Holy Land adventure. And that takes place right now and culminates the search for the lost tablet, because when the 6 tablets are found, the 6th tablet of King David's Psalm claims that there was a lost 7th tablet that was intentionally hidden, so not really lost, but hidden, and that tablet could only be discovered by this amazing woman who shows up in David's Psalm, and he calls her his Kohav Hayam, which in Hebrew means my star of the sea. She had appeared to him as a muse to lead him. And so the seventh tablet is thought to be then King David's final prophecy. And so this leads to a Holy Land adventure. And the last part of the book then is set in 2022, this year.
Right.
And March 17th is when it all comes together. That's this year. March 17th is the Jewish holiday of Purim, which is from the book of Esther, when God's plan all comes together and saves the Jews from destruction. And so it all comes together on March the 17th.
Absolutely fascinating. I think you have a copy of the book there. Hold up a copy so our guests can see it, our listeners, viewers can see it. And it's hold up just a little higher. So it's Dancing with David. And was this made easier by the fact you had already written a book before?
No, a completely different thing than what I had done before. So in some ways, I guess the answer to that would be yes. But this is so completely different that honestly, I began writing it and got serious about writing it when our church shut down for COVID on March the 15th, 2020. So 2 years ago now. And I had opened a file on it. I had thought I wanted to do something with this 4 or 5 months before, but I hadn't had the time to do anything. And so once the church shut down, and there for several months, you know, we were all in our homes locked away, and I had all the time in the world. And so then it began to really take shape.
Wow. Well, the reason I was asking, I mean, going through the publishing and finding a publisher and finding all those procedures, that obviously was redundant. But the reason I'm going back to this is because that seed, that dangling participle, as it were, that you've looked back on for years and years. And then there was just, frankly, it sounds like God's perfect time for you to have months to focus on this, stare out at the lake and go, what if?
There's a lot of what if here. A lot of what if. And as a matter of fact, the very beginning says that the description of the book, for those who might call it up and look at it, it says that the birth of a little boy in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago was absolutely not what centuries of Jewish messianic expectations was. So what if? What if there's another surprise out there? What if before Jesus comes back to the Mount of Olives, as the New Testament says that he will do, what if God has another baby on the way, a girl this time, another child of David, if you would, almost a half sister of Jesus himself? And so that's where we're going with this book. So there's some eschatological undertones here, some on this adventure that takes the reader into some there's a lot of theology here. There's a lot of Bible commentary. It's not Bible commentary and it's not theology, but there is a lot of those things here in this book. And it's a great journey.
You're intriguing me now. And I want to tell you, and I'll tell our listeners and viewers, I wanted to share something. About 2 years ago, we became more closely associated, I think would be a fair way to phrase that, because with the shutdown, all of a sudden, every church I knew wanted to be online, and they all called at the same time and said, "Hey, Dennis, can you get us online?" And
we paid you more than the others, right?
Some paid us more than the others, and some I could help immediately, and some I had to kind of let's work this out. But where I went with that is we started filming the services and recording some services for you, and we would put those services up, and in a discussion later on where you and I had more time to speak directly to each other. I made a note. I said, you know, a good speaker will put put the cookies on a lower shelf. Okay. An excellent speaker, who I call you, would be somebody who puts a cookie on every shelf. And because I know how you do that.
Yes.
You will put a cookie on the high shelf. If you have a doctorate, you'll go, "Oh, yeah, okay." If you're an elementary student, you'll "Oh, okay, that makes sense." So I'll give that recommendation to Sig, and that is, I know you put a cookie on every shelf all the way across. Was it tough to remove yourself, and pardon the term, how do I say this? In a very Judeo-Christian world, it's easy and in a post-messianic period for us to look and say, okay, well, this was all, we knew the Messiah was coming. That's not what the Old Testament says. No, they knew a Messiah was coming, but they didn't know his name would be Jesus, right? In our book. And did you have to remove yourself from some parts of this, or how do you handle that?
I think just the opposite, Dennis. Actually, I inserted myself. As I said a moment ago, in some ways, this is a fictionalized autobiography.
Yeah.
Because I have two main characters here, who a Jewish professor and a Christian pastor, male and female. He's the professor who comes in his very first year of teaching out of Ann Arbor to a Christian college. And one of his students is a 22-year-old female who is struggling with a call to ministry, a call to preach. And so in some ways, that's a reflection of what I was doing when I went to Ann Arbor. I was struggling with my call to ministry. I'd been in ministry. As I said, I was in the Baptist church before I moved up there. And I was really struggling. I thought I wanted to move into academia completely. And so in some ways, those characters are really reflections of me. One of them, the professor, and the other, the pastor, who come together. And hopefully their union will create something worthwhile and beneficial for the world.
Well, it literally does. This sounds absolutely fascinating. Other tangents I want to take just for a moment. If I'm not mistaken, are you leaving the country in a couple of months?
I am. It will be my 15th trip to Israel on April the 25th. I've led, as a matter of fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because the book is dedicated to the many hundreds of pilgrims who have trusted me to guide their Holy Land adventures. And those certainly, when I'm talking about places and events in the Holy Land, they will have a mental picture of that. But yes, we're leaving on April the 25th. This is a COVID delayed trip from last year, and now we're all good to go. Israel's opened up again, and we're ready to go. We have a great group of about 60 pilgrims that will be with me on this particular trip.
So actually, one of them is my next door neighbor right over here, Donna, and Connie will be going.
Oh,
with
yeah.
you. So, yeah, wonderful.
They will be with us.
But the reason I say that, I haven't had the pleasure to go, but I've read the reviews of people that have gone, and they say it's a life-changing event. It gives them a different basis, is what I hear tell.
It is. It really is. And I lead faith-based tours all over Europe, and from the cradle of Christianity in Turkey and Greece and Italy and on over into more developed denominational Christianity as we know it from England and all the Ireland and all the rest. So I lead a lot of trips, faith-based trips, but by far the most important is to go where Jesus walked. We say we are going to run where Jesus walked, because we're not there long enough to really walk. We have to really run from site to site to get a taste of the Holy Land. And it's a spectacular.
How many days is that tour, Sig?
Ours is 11 days in Israel. And then we add 3 days to go to Jordan, which will take us down to one of the wonders of the world, the city of Petra, which is, of course, famous from Harrison Ford and Sean Connery in that last scene when they come to that city that's carved out of the limestone. Literally
out of the Petros.
Exactly right, out of the rock. And that is such an amazing sight. And I always like to take our pilgrims. Some of them can't extend those 3 days. They need to get back to the United States. But I always like to take our pilgrims to Jordan. It's a wonderful, or to Egypt. We do both.
And I'm just reading between the lines, but there's no security issues that you've had or anything like that lately?
No, we feel perfectly safe over there, and no security issues that I've ever had to face in my 15 trips there.
Well, I've got to ask, after 15 trips, where was your first trip and when was that? And I mean, is this usually every couple of years, or how often do you go?
It's 1997, and I've traditionally gone every other year, although there's some exceptions to that. 1997 was my very first trip. I actually serve in Arkansas as the director of travel ministry for a company called Educational Opportunities Tours. It's a faith-based Christian operation that was headquartered in Lakeland, Florida. And I serve as their Arkansas representative. So I help pastors and link them with opportunities to lead faith-based tours. And so my first trip was 1997, which is 25 years ago. And I then met another David. Speaking of another, I've already talked about David Noel Friedman, my great professor.
Right.
And but I met another David there, and I'll be looking forward to seeing David in April. And that's my guide, David Aarons. And he's been a dear friend and very much of an inspiration for this book. And so David Aarons has been my guide for 25 years. I'm the tour host. I provide the spiritual atmosphere, and David gives us historical and flora and fauna and all of that. And the trip becomes then a wonderful experience for our pilgrims, and they get a very balanced look at the Holy Land.
Well, and this is just my nosy questions, and I hope our listeners and viewers are following my nosiness, and maybe they have their own. But would you have been able to write this book, Dancing with David, had you not been taking your tours? I mean, would it have meant, or would it be as valid?
Oh, no way.
Really?
No way. And as a matter of fact, I was sending the manuscripts to David Aarons for his input on this as well. But I'm talking about various places, various sites, and the architectural undergirding of the final scenes in this book, and it's a very explosive ending, very unexpected ending, are on the Mount of Olives, and some of the great churches and hospitals on the Mount of Olives, and in particular the Church of All Nations and Dominus Flevit. These are two churches built by the great architect of the Holy Land in the 20th century, the Italian architect Antonio Barlucci. No one can go to the Holy Land and come back since the 20th century without being impacted by the architecture of Antonio Barlucci. And he himself becomes a part of the story, fictionalized, of course. But he's very, very real, and those places are very, very real. And those who have been to the Holy Land with me or with someone else will know these places very, very intimately.
This sounds absolutely fascinating. And you've teased me enough. Okay, I've got to at least read the last part, but I'll have to read the whole thing to understand.
But the explosion?
Yeah, the explosion. Well, but I got to tell you, I've seen a review, and apparently the explosion and the ending and everything else is pretty much blowing away some of your reviewers too. What have we heard?
Well, we have the book actually landed on #1 on Amazon's hot new releases for religious historical fiction, the genre that we began our interview with. And so it landed on #1. It's been playing around between #1 and #4. It'll go up and down and up and down in these last days. It's very fun to watch that. But some of the reviewers are starting to come in, and one of them today that we saw talked about the journey that she took with me on this book, and made some very wonderful statements, especially at the end, just to say that she recommends the book as a very exceptional, let me look at it and see what she said, the exceptional tale that will leave readers of all genres awestruck. And so I hope others will agree with her when they read the book.
It would be hard to get a better compliment than that, it sounds like to me.
That was a very great review. We'd love to see it. That came from Feathered Quill. And so we'll have some other professional reviewers coming in these next few days. Hopefully they'll all be like this one.
Well, I got to ask, was this your goal when you were a little boy? Did you say, man, someday I want to write a book? Huh?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know, Dennis. That's a good question. I think I just wanted to be a professional basketball player back then.
You had the height. You know, people would ask me, you and I both are relatively tall, and people would say, well, Dennis, do you play basketball? And I always say, no, it requires something I don't have. It's called coordination. And I couldn't, I just couldn't put all those together. Do you think you have another book in you?
No doubt. There is groundwork here for a sequel.
Really?
And we're already talking about it with the publishers, and so there's definite groundwork for a sequel, but I haven't had the energy to really develop it much yet, but I've sure got some great thoughts toward it.
I'm guessing that as we move to the village and you think more about retirement and winding down, that you realize now it's probably one of the busiest times of your life.
Yeah, you're not kidding. It truly is. We're extremely busy.
Well,
This is a great community of faith, not just here at Christ of the Hills United Methodist Church, but the entire village is such a wonderful place, and so many great churches in our community.
I tell you what I really appreciate here in the village, and that is the cooperative spirit. A lot of places, churches don't always get along very well together, if you know what I mean. And it's not like they're I
don't know what you mean.
No, you never heard of that. I've never
heard of churches not getting along, or of church members not getting along.
No. It's you don't want to talk about fiction. No, that's fiction, right? Yeah.
Well, that is where this book is leading. And the prophecy of David that they find on the 7th tablet prophesies a new baby girl who will, with her holy brother Jesus, bring about the healing of the nations. So all those squabbles that we're seeing right now with this terrible, terrible thing in Ukraine, healed through this new child.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that part. This is fascinating, Sig. It really is. It really is. I've just dawned on me. Oh, I didn't get the list. Randy's not here yet, or maybe he's here, and I hope I can tap him in here, but I'm going to go ahead and give you the lightning round, okay?
Okay.
Hamburgers, tacos, steak.
Steak.
Hiking, walking, fishing.
Walking.
Your first concert.
My first concert. I don't remember.
What? Favorite group or album?
Boy, I tell you, I talk a lot about the Beatles in this book,
really,
part because the professor is a Beatles fan and talks about it in his lectures.
Wow.
And particularly John Lennon and his fascination for the number 9 throughout his life. There's a lot of numerology in this as well, by the way. And, Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that here. But I would say my favorite group, and this is also in the end of the book, I bring them in and bring one of their songs in, and that's Chicago.
Oh, man. What a great group. Yeah.
And I love the horns. Yeah.
I was about to say, it's just an excuse for guys to have a rock band with a lot of horns is what it boils down to.
There you go.
Favorite movie?
I don't know, Dennis. I wasn't prepared for this, was I?
The lightning round.
It's the lightning round. My favorite movie. I'll pass.
Okay. We'll let you pass.
It'll be Dancing with David when it comes out.
I like that. Or the sequel.
Yeah.
Still Dancing with David, if that's the sequel. What's your perfect day in the village? What's it like for you? What do you look and say, man, that's going to be my great day?
Well, weather-wise, it's not like last week. It's more like this week. And maybe even next week when we have some mild weather. My perfect day in the village would be able to I'm an early morning person, so I like to get up and spend time at my computer writing and checking things and eating a nice breakfast, and then heading to the church and putting in some time here and visiting with people, knowing people, eating lunch with people like I did with you. And the really perfect time, I'm more of a lake person than a golf person. I love them both, but I'd love to get this weather nice enough to get back out on my boat.
I think that's tempting to me too. I'm ready to move past onto that. I am. Well, Sig, is there anything else you'd like to add? Because it's been a fascinating hour conversation here with you.
Really not. I just appreciate you inviting me to be a part of this, and appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about Dancing with David.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
Enjoy it. I would say go Google it, Dancing with David, Siegfried Johnson. Go to Amazon and grab the book.
It sounds like at Amazon, or I can put it on my Kindle. Is there an audio version of it yet?
We're talking about an audio version right now. As a matter of fact, I've got there will be five ladies, because this is narrated, you see, by one of the main characters, Stella Maris, who was that 22-year-old college senior when she met the Jewish professor.
Right.
And so I need a female voice, preferably one who knows a little bit of Hebrew, because there's some Hebrew words in here I'd love the pronunciation to be right. So we're not sure we're doing an audio version, but right now the book is taken off so well that it's certainly a topic enough to where we're getting interview tapes that I'm going to be looking at this week and next, and choosing one of the ladies as my narrator.
How wonderful. Well, let's go one more here. How would people get in touch with you if they wanted to ask you some questions or wanted to learn more about this?
Well, how to get in touch with me, one way would be through just calling the church office here at Christ of the Hills United Methodist Church. And but my email is siegfriedjohnson@yahoo.com. Mm-hmm. And that would be a good way to do it. And my website is siegfriedjohnson.com, www.siegfriedjohnson.com. So many ways to get in touch with me, but I'd sure love to hear from you. And for those who do purchase the book and read it, and if you like it, I want you to leave a rating and a review at Amazon. That's very, very important. If you don't like it, don't worry about it.
Don't tell anybody else if you don't like it.
Don't rate it at all.
Sig, as always, it's a pleasure and a delight. I'm so thankful for having you as a friend, and great to have you on. For Nate Hot Springs Village Inside Out, I'm Dennis Simpson. He was Randy Cantrell, and this is Sig Johnson. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Hot Springs Village Inside Out, a podcast where Hot Springs Village, Arkansas is the star. Please subscribe to the podcast. You can do that by visiting our website, hsvinsideout.com, and tell a friend.